Hey, hope everyone's doing alright. I'm gonna open this video up with a question. What countries do you associate with film cameras, or even cameras in general for that matter? I'm gonna let you think about it for a couple of seconds. If I were to guess, you probably thought of Japan, Germany, and to a lesser extent France and the United States, for example. But what if I told you that there was another country playing the film photography game at the time? And it's no wonder that this competitor would be Russia, or the Soviet Union as it was called back then. The Soviet camera industry is a really interesting case study because it was built upon counterfeit products. And I mean that quite literally. Up until the early 1930s, the Soviet Union was importing basically all of their photographic equipment. Back then, the German Leica pretty much dominated the professional photography landscape. In 1932, Leica would release their second rangefinder model, the Leica II. In the same year, the Soviets began producing Leica 1 clones in a commune in Kharkiv, modern Ukraine. One thing about this commune is that it served as a youth rehabilitation center. So not only were the Soviets mimicking whatever Leica was doing at the time, they were doing so through child labor. But anyways, this was a really small batch, a test run if you will. The real kicker came in 1934, the year in which the FED 1 camera would begin production. This was a blatant copy of the Leica 2 in pretty much all aspects, the only differences being the engineering and build quality, which were greatly superior on the Leica model. And there's a good reason for this, because while Leica had a team of specialized engineers and workers at their factories, FED was employing teams with no specialized training whatsoever. In addition to their cameras, FED also began producing lenses which closely resemble their German counterparts, as you can see right here. And the Soviets actually tried passing off some of these cameras as actual Leicas by engraving the same stuff that Leica was engraving in the top plate and writing Lights Elmar on the front ring of their lenses. The FED 1 camera would remain in production along with a series of lenses and other accessories until 1941, the year in which Germany invaded the USSR. Kharkiv changed hands multiple times during the war, but after peace was established, the Soviets found out that the FED factory had been destroyed. Around this time, fellow Soviet camera manufacturers Kiev and Zorky began putting out rangefinders of their own, with the Kievs being replicas of German pre-war Contax rangefinders, and the Zorkys being literally the same model as the FED 1, but with the Zorky branding. One interesting thing about Zorky is that they tried to pass off some of their cameras as actual Leicas used by the Luftwaffe, and they tried doing this in the most ridiculous way possible. I kid you not. They engraved Nazi swastikas in the front of the lens cover, and would sometimes engrave the word Luftwaffe in the top plate as well. Which to me is absolutely hilarious, because the actual Leicas used by German officials during the war didn't have any of these markings. Anyways, let's focus on FED for now. In 1955, 21 years after the debut of the FED 1, FED released you guessed it, the FED 2. And this can be considered their first original model, since it had nothing to do with any Leica camera at all. Despite abandoning the traditional Leica aesthetic in the visual department, their operation is quite similar, with the only differences being that the FED 2 combined the viewfinder and the rangefinder, had a removable back for easier film loading, but only managed to reach speeds of upwards to 1/500th of a second. Around this time, German manufacturers began designing their own original lenses, and so brands like Industar and Jupiter entered the market. Later FED 2 models were paired with an Industar 61 lens, of which I have a copy with me. One noteworthy thing to point out about these early FED and Zorky models is that they all used the Leica thread mount, which means that in theory you could use Leica lenses on a FED and FED lenses on a Leica. In 1961, the FED 3 was introduced. The first models retained a few characteristics of the FED 2, while later models got rid of the ledge between the shutter speed selector and the shutter release button, and with the advanced knob being replaced by an advanced lever. And after this huge intro, it's finally time to talk about the FED 3. And as you can see, this is one of the later versions, since it doesn't have that ledge right over here. At the time, I'm pairing it with a Jupiter 8 50mm f2 lens. Now, with the lens detached, starting from the top, you have the rewind knob, you have a cold shoe, the shutter speed selector, the shutter release button, and the advanced lever. On the top housing of the advanced lever, you also have the exposure counter and the ISO setting. The only purpose of the ISO setting is to remind you at which ISO you're shooting, since this camera doesn't have an integrated light meter. Looking at the bottom, you get the tripod mount right here, along with two latches that hold the back in place. On the front, you can see the little rangefinder coupling tab right here, along with two windows, the viewfinder and the rangefinder one, along with the self-timer and a flash PC sync port. On the back you can see the viewfinder window along with the diopter adjustment dial. There's also the FED branding right there and the Made in USSR engraving here. Now if we unscrew these latches, we'll be able to remove the back, and I can show you how to load film on this beast. So first you see this little metal tab right here, right above the take-up spool. After the leader is secure, just pull the whole roll, insert it right here, work the rewind knob a little, just to get some tension going, and after the film is flat like this, insert the back once again, and tighten both the latches. Fire a couple of blanks as you would do on an SLR, and you're ready to shoot. The shooting process is pretty much the same as with all other rangefinder cameras with interchangeable lenses. There's only one little quirk. If you want to change the shutter speed, you must do so with the shutter being cocked. Otherwise, you risk ruining the whole mechanism. To rewind, you must first disengage the film from the take-up spool by holding down this rim around the shutter release button and rotating it counterclockwise. Then you can rewind the film using the rewind knob. Next up, I'll be showing you some shots that I took with the FED 3 along with the Industar 61 lens. The Jupiter 8 is supposedly a better lens, but my copy has a lot of superficial scratches. I shot a roll with that lens but haven't developed it yet. But focusing on the Industar, you can see that it's a really sharp lens regardless of the aperture. Following the FED 3, FED released the FED 4 in 1964 and the FED 5 in 1977, the latter of which would remain in production until 1990, making it the last Soviet rangefinder with a Leica thread mount ever produced. Now for my thoughts on my FED camera and Soviet cameras in general. Starting off with the bad, you can definitely tell that the craftsmanship just isn't there, nor is the engineering typical of Japanese and Western European brands. Now for the good, they're cheap. This is not a camera for someone who wants the best of the best. This is a camera for someone who wants to try something new on a budget. This is how I usually go about this kind of stuff. Back in October last year, I wanted to try out an SLR. So instead of dishing out a couple thousand on a Nikon F6, I bought a Praktica MTL3. Praktica was based in East Germany, which was not a part of the Soviet Union per se, but was a member of the Eastern Bloc nonetheless. Once I figured out that I liked shooting on an SLR, I invested in something a little bit better. A couple months later, I wanted to try out a TLR, so instead of paying 3K for a Rolleiflex, I got a Lubitel, and then upgraded to something a little bit better. And lastly, I wanted to try out a rangefinder with interchangeable lenses, so instead of going all out on the most expensive Leica I could find, I settled for a FED 3. And as of now, cover your ears, I'm looking for an upgrade. That's it for today's video, hope you guys enjoyed it. And before you go, I'd love to hear all about your experiences with Soviet cameras. I'll see you in the next video, have a good one.